The reality is billions of people around the world do not have access to safe ways to store their money or preserve their wealth or access financial opportunities. And so stablecoins are really bringing US capital markets to everyone else, which I think is a huge upgrade on a humanity level for society. I think people think, oh, a stablecoin is just I spin up a money market fund and that's it. But if you really are running a robust stablecoin, you need to have independent audits, bank account and bank account network, key management system. These are all end up totaling millions of dollars a year. I have a lot of respect for the Athena team. These products are in the early days too, and they're going to be $1 trillion worth of these products. I think it's a misnomer to call them stablecoins because they're not.
Hello and welcome everyone to the New Money Podcast, the show where we talk about crypto and hopefully find out how exactly the future of money looks like. Currently, I've got the oldest coin in the world, the Lydian lion behind me, and in front of me today I've got Nick, my good friend Nick, building Agora, kind of shaping the future of money. And I'm very much looking forward to the episode. You guys recently announced your Series A led by Paradigm, and we've got a number of interesting topics to cover, kind of from the micro inner workings of how AUSD works to the macro of the broader stablecoin state of play in the States and the world. So Nick, thanks so much for joining us here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. People that know me know I was a big classics geek in high school. I learned ancient Greek in high school, and obviously Agora, the marketplace, the Greek word. How did that come to be?
Yeah, I'm a huge classics nerd as well. So I took Latin in middle school and high school, but I got, I really developed a passion for history at a very early age. And I loved classical history and studied actually history in college. So when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I got a lot of advice from my parents, their friends, people that had long careers, and they're like, do something that you love in college. I think a lot of people have the inclination to study business because they want to go into the finance of the business world. And the advice I got was, do what you love. It's the last chance you'll have to really just learn things that you're just interested in, whether or not they have an applicability to your professional career. And so when I was starting the business, we were thinking through names. I have a huge love of classical history, and we're also thinking, it's probably best if this starts with an A because it's free marketing. You're always at the top of the list. I think a good example of this is I was going to the Monad ecosystem page, and we're smack right in the middle because we're not even the first day, we're the second day. So, and then this is something that's become very common, right? It's what Jeff did at Amazon as well. And we were thinking of some things that make sense. And I thought Agora was the ancient meeting place, right? Where people either exchange goods or ideas, and we kind of wanted to do that with money. And so it felt like an awesome fit. And we had one other candidate in the running, which was Amphora, which is the vessel that people use to carry goods. But there was some DeFi protocol that launched right when we were actually starting the company called Amphora. And so we're oh, we can't do that one. And so, yeah, that's what got us to Agora.
Yeah, beautiful. To this day, I talk about this a bit. I still don't know if it's really true, but it's a quasi-scientific fact that I read in a classics journal years ago, that apparently it was common for ancient Greek men and women to store their money in their cheek. So they had no
really?
Yeah, they had no wallets. They put a coin in their cheek and they went to the Agora and bought some wine and hung out, right?
Interesting.
So I think also an interesting one. And I agree, right? I actually wanted to do classics in college, and then in the last minute pivoted and didn't do it and did law. I perceived as a less risky choice, and then dropped out.
You didn't get advice from, the old, 50-year-old career guys.
Exactly. I wasn't well informed. And then I dropped out a year later, so it didn't lead anywhere anyways. But and not to set you up for overly dramatic framing, but when was the last time when you felt that your history study informed something you did in the business every day when you're conquering the world?
Yeah, I would say relatively frequently, right? Because history doesn't always repeat, but it rhymes, right? And I think there's a lot of parallels to what we're doing in our business with stablecoins and stablecoin infrastructure, as there are with old money systems, but also even things as recent as cloud software, right? I spent my whole career investing in cloud software, and I felt I got into that in inning 6 or 7. And, I really got, I first got into to Bitcoin and digital assets in 2016, but I really got sucked back in around DeFi summer when it just became like very obvious to me that blockchain was going to eat financial services and payments over the next 20 to 30 years in like a very similar way to how cloud ate on-premise software and a lot of human-driven workflows. And, Salesforce went public in, 04, you had AWS, Azure, GCP in 06, 8, 10. Like, I think what I always try to at least use recent history to do is remind myself of how early we are. And like, things may feel like they're moving a mile a minute because they are, but like just take the long view. And, if you continue to build the business with like the long-term view in mind, like you'll do okay.
Interesting. Let's look maybe also into the kind of like more recent history of your family, right? Like your grandfather, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your grandfather, John van Eck, was a pioneer for gold funds.
Yeah.
Kind of pioneered that financial instrument. I mean, if I'm sure it did, how did that inform your view on the market and what you're doing today?
Yeah. So I grew up in a family of gold bugs. That's right. Like my grandfather started the first gold fund in the US in 1968 because he was taking, a forward view that deficit spending in the US would cause us to abandon the gold standard. And that happened, sure enough, 3 years later. And gold went from $35 to like several hundred. And the Van Eck Gold Miner Fund was actually the best performing U.S. mutual fund that whole decade because it was like a flat decade for the S&P 500, but gold, 10x. And so I grew up, getting like Cougarans, which are like the South African gold coins, very similar to that coin in your background, for my birthday. And I was working at a hedge fund in 2016, and the PM there was buying Bitcoin in his PA and had just written a thesis paper that it would hit 100K by 2030. And I was, 20 years old, just about. And I was like, 200X, by around the time I'm 30, like, I should look into this. And that's when I first read the Bitcoin white paper, and it resonated with me, not just because of, my gold background, but also because I would say like a lot of the philosophical tenets that, Bitcoiners follow are sort of in line with my view of monetary policy in the world. And so that's how and when I first got involved. And in a very cliche was like, the younger generation were like, oh, this is digital gold, which is 10x better than the physical version.
To unpack that maybe a bit for the listeners, like what are the kind of like underlying philosophical principles that you felt Bitcoin aligned around and you identified with?
Yeah, I think one, like having a non-sovereign form of money, right? Like in talking about history, like if you look throughout history, right, whether it's the Spanish, in the age of colonialism, or the late stage Roman Empire, all of these like global empires with the global reserve asset end up debasing their currency, which which led to, but also stemmed from a lot of internal discord and problems, right? And so, I think, having sort of a non-sovereign programmable form of money was like really interesting to me. It's very interesting, obviously it's like what got a lot of Bitcoiners excited, and it's very similar to how sort of gold bugs view the world, which is like you have these evil central banks that print money, and it's not really based on anything. I'd also say like the tenets of self-custody and like not your keys, not your coins, like apply to a lot of gold bugs, right? Like many of them keep like gold coins or gold bars like in a safety deposit box or like in a hole in their backyard or somewhere that they haven't told anyone. So like I would say like those are probably two of the primary characteristics, but also like both of them believe in monetary debasement, right? And while that wasn't status quo in, or that view of the world was in status quo in 2008 or even 2016 when I first got interested in Bitcoin, like, I guess going back to the history points, like, these things are inevitable and it's a matter of time. And like, I saw how much money the US government was spending in 2016 and how recklessly it was. Did I think we'd get to how reckless we are today so quickly? No. But like, I thought that so I was precisely wrong, but like directionally correct. I would say, unfortunately for me, like, I was precisely wrong to like a magnitude worse for the United States and like other global governments' fiscal positions. But I guess that's like a magnitude better off for, for the Bitcoiners and the gold bug community, right? Like as today, I think gold is actually hitting all time highs, right? It's now above $3,600. So, I'm in Bitcoin definitely for the long term.
Do you feel this was like the kind of like last shot in the US, the whole Doge and Elon thing to like balance the budget, and there was like now this decisive vote against it, and we're now full steam ahead?
I don't know if it's the last shot, but like this is taking your medicine is always hard. And the United States is the cleanest, as Druckenmiller puts it, is like the cleanest shirt in a laundry basket. Like you're still definitely not buying like the euro or the yen, right? Or like the yuan, like over the dollar. But, I think we're kind of getting to the point where there's going to have to, hard times are going to force the hand of people, right? And it's like, look, you can either cut spending or benefits, in advance to remediate the problem before it gets to a certain, a stage. But if you wait until you're at the deathbed, it's going to be the worst, the most painful way to come back, right? So, and I kind of think we're increasingly getting there. But yeah, I don't want to be too morose on this podcast.
Yeah, let's spin the wheel and look into stablecoins and the beauty and prosperity of the emerging market. We can tie it into the philosophical question around Bitcoin being kind of like a non-sovereign asset. Like, do you feel that stablecoin that we are actually like, this meme? Are we actually the bad guys? How do you feel about the relationship of stablecoin to that original crypto philosophy?
So I think we have to think about things on like a global context, right? The reality is billions of people around the world do not have access to safe ways to store their money or preserve their wealth or access financial opportunities. And this exists for a variety of reasons, right? Either there's low property rights in the place that they live. There are no financial markets where they live. And one of the beautiful things about stablecoins is that it really exports like global US capital markets to the globe, right? Now, if you're in Argentina, El Salvador, Turkey, Thailand, you can access and receive dollars much cheaper and much quicker than you could before. You can also access, opportunities in DeFi and on chain. And so like, this is like a renaissance for most of the world, right? I'm sitting here in New York. Most Americans have access to a bank account, or a brokerage account and have a pretty easy way to send and receive money to their peers in the United States, but also store and grow their wealth. It's not true for like 70% of the global population. And like, so stablecoins are really bringing US capital markets to everyone else, which I think is a huge upgrade on like a humanity level for society. And it's like a large reason of why I'm spending, all my waking hours, like trying to bring stablecoins to traditional businesses and also, financial opportunities to people globally.
And you guys have always been dedicated to the non-US markets, right? And like the validity of the value proposition specifically for the emerging markets. Does that still hold for you? And like, what's the strategy there?
Yeah, I would say most, we still are going to be focused on the US, but our primary focus is non-US. And it's because stablecoins are 100x more impactful outside the United States than they are in the United States, right? If we're being intellectually honest, it's easy for me to send a wire to a peer or another business or via Venmo and it gets done same day, right? Whereas if you're moving money cross-border, whether you're an individual or a business, it can take days. It can cost like percentage points. I was talking to someone at the Bitso conference in Mexico City last week, and they're like, oh yes, some of these on-ramps, to move money between jurisdictions charge 6%. Like, that's crazy. That's like almost the annualized return of the S&P, right? Like taking risk, right? Like taking market risk, right? And so, whether it's because you're enabling them to, store their dollars, earn on dollars, send money faster, cheaper, like stables are just 100 times more valuable outside the US. And like the product market fit has been very clear for a decade now. Right. I think in the United States, for us to get to a point where stablecoins are better, you're going to need to have exchanges, banks. A lot of these folks start to move on to on-chain based rails for you to really unlock the value of stablecoins. And we're just not there yet in the US, but we are there outside the United States.
Let's look at the market and kind of like dissect what you believed was wrong with it, or maybe even is wrong with it still today, that led you to kind of like launch AUSD, right? I think Rob Haddock in your recent fundraising announcement said something along the lines like, hey, the market is rife with misaligned incentives and broken regulatory structures. But what does he mean here, and where do you feel the market is not yet there?
Yeah, so my prior firm, General Catalyst, we actually were investors in Circle. We led the seed round in 2013, so way before I got to the firm. They built a great business. But I'd say Tether was the first, right? What they really cracked was moving on exchange pairs from Bitcoin to dollar-based pairs, right? So now you're not trading with two volatile assets back and forth. You have one at least somewhat stable asset against Bitcoin, ETH. And like, that's where they had, a lot of their success, right? And then I would say Circle has had a tremendous amount of success, obviously working with like the de facto monopoly exchange in the US, but also they were early, into DeFi. In Tether's case, they weren't really focused on building like I would say technology-driven platform. And in Circle's case, they really have chosen one main partner to great success. But from my perspective, that left, every other company in crypto sort of out in the lurch, right? You have thousands of businesses and applications using these assets, driving liquidity towards them, and creating utility for these assets that aren't either part of the economic equation or do not have like a relationship with the issuer at all. And so what we wanted to do was build an institutional grade stablecoin, right? So State Street is the cash custodian, one of the largest custodian banks in the world. And Eck is the investment manager, so 70-year-old, $130 billion investment manager that also really partnered with these businesses and apps and ecosystems to drive revenue to their platforms, right? And so our approach is, we actually think you should make the majority of the economics, and then we take a spread to drive liquidity, build infrastructure, drive compliance as part of this sort of global network. And that's resonated well, right? It's kind of like, hey, you have $100 million on your platform. Do you want to monetize it or not? And the answer is always yes, right? And where we're really seeing a ton of success is with new businesses, right? Because there's no switching costs. It's like hey, do you want to, monetize your balances or do you not? And, especially for developers or small teams that are strapped for cash, like even $100K a year, can make a huge difference, right? And so, that's the thesis.
That makes sense. How do you feel about what Circle is doing in the space? I think like we read in the S1, hey, like I don't know how they call the line item, but they're spending money on incentives, right? And and I think larger partners have yield sharing agreements in place with Circle. How do you feel about the convergence as competition increases in this market, like where things are headed?
Yeah, so they obviously have one large agreement with Coinbase. I think they do some smaller agreements on the side, but because they share half their revenue with Coinbase, they don't have as much flexibility from a sustainable perspective that we have, right? Because we're just saying, hey, it's like your platform, it's your money, right? Maybe we pay out, 80%, 90%, 100%, right? But because they have this situation with Coinbase where they're sharing 50% on all revenue, right? It really ties them to the hip together, right? Which has worked super well for both companies. It's kind of everyone else out in the lurch that maybe wants to monetize balances and control their cash flow. And so that's where we can slot in and be super helpful.
I think one thing that I found really interesting when we're thinking about the kind of like the steady state of the stablecoin market, I've always struggled a bit with the idea that we'll have so many stablecoins, right? And I always look to like the PayPal stablecoin as somewhat of a case study, like, hey, this doesn't really work that well, right? I always thought, okay, PayPal is like an amazing company to launch their own stablecoin, right? They've got the distribution, they've got a brand, they're a financial services company, and it kind of didn't really work. And I think even the folks at Paxos are somewhat kind of like reflecting on it, saying, like, is this really the move? And so what I think is really exciting is like that you guys, you kind of move past these liquidity challenges that come from fragmentation because it's all built on AUSD, right? Maybe walk us through the thinking there and how that works and benefits the use cases.
Yeah, so this is one of the newer products that we announced, which is like white labeling our stable coin. And what this does is really gives the end customer control around the branding and the token itself, right? So that it's its own token. But we were looking at these prior models like Paxos, right, which has done white labeling for years, and said, hey, like this is probably the wrong approach. You're creating an entirely new network, an entirely new liquidity pool for each token that you launched. And we're like, okay, well, if you could share liquidity with an underlying asset, right, that sort of builds around, sort of one liquidity layer, like that's going to be advantageous to anyone that wants to sort of launch their own stable. And like this is one piece of it. I think part of it is certainly working with partners, on the on and off ramp side, the card side. But the way that it works is we deploy a contract where AUSD goes in, new USD comes out, new USD goes in, AUSD comes back out. And it makes it super seamless, and we can get kind of anyone stood up in a matter of days. And the folks that love this, range from fintechs to gaming companies to chain ecosystems. You sort of have the whole spectrum of businesses.
To tell us maybe your favorite customer story that you guys recently launched.
Yeah, so one of them is actually like, very old, sort of 2021, and by very old, I mean 2021 era game, which is the Steppen team. So they're, they wanted to build like a white label stablecoin for like their whole gaming ecosystem. So they launched that with us. We have another consumer company that's very large that's going to be probably doing something with us soon. And like, yeah, they want to use it for the games, like spending. It's like, Fortnite or Call of Duty, any of those games, you're spending sort of like these in-game asset tokens that are created by, you swiping your credit card. And a lot of people are saying like, hey, we should just make this done via stables because we have these skins or NFTs or whatever that are tradable in our internal marketplace anyways. And so, we should use it with them, use it with them as well. And so yeah, that's one that I'm fairly excited about.
Kind of circling back on the kind of like the idea, hey, you can get anyone stood up in a matter of days. You share the liquidity, right? You transport some of these network effects. Do you feel sometimes that you guys are losing out on enterprise with that approach, right? Like I feel like maybe like an enterprise customer will want to segregate, right, and want to have their own structure.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's probably just not a good use of our time. It's like, it's very expensive. And this is also, part of the shared economic benefit, right? It's very expensive to run. I think people think, oh, a stablecoin is just like, I spin up a money market fund and that's it, right? But if you really are running like a robust stablecoin, you need to have independent audits. If you want to have it segregated, it has to have its own bank account and bank account network, crypto accounting system, its own key management system. Like, these are all like end up totaling like millions of dollars a year, right? So unless like it's a very large enterprise that, is probably going to have $1 billion plus in deposits, it's not worth it. And so, I think a few folks are sort of trying to do these one-off things, and I think they'll probably stop doing it unless it's like a very, very large enterprise, like a Google or something, because it's super expensive. I think too, as more like revenue and financial discipline comes into crypto businesses, right, there will be more of an effort to make money and not just lose money.
How do you see this playing out? Like, how many real standalone issuers do you think we'll have?
I mean, we'd have to define real. So like, let's say like payment stable coins that are like 5 to 10 billion plus in AUM in, let's call it 10 years. I think there'll be like a dozen. That would be my guess. And then obviously you'll have derivatives. Like maybe they have like their own stablecoin on top. That's another 10 billion, right? But it's like, Deutsche Telekom's stablecoin or something. But I think there'll probably be like a dozen very large issuers.
And these are like obviously the crypto and tech native players that win the winner takes most market, like Circle, Tether, and then maybe people with very large scale existing distribution like big tech, telco.
So it's funny, right? Like people always bring up like, oh, like, are you worried about like JPM's stablecoin or like some of these other guys? I think they're like completely different. Like they're almost like not even in our same category, right? Like it's like if you took the balance sheet of Boney today, right, and all the cash that they sit on in banks and turn it into a stablecoin, like that doesn't compete with Circle or Tether or us, right? Like it's just like a different form of that money, but like they're not going and trying to build like a liquidity network, across local exchanges globally or get integrated into DeFi. Right. And so, I really view it as like a dozen stablecoin issuers where like that's like the core business. Right. But I think you may have, 100 stablecoins, right, that are, 5 to 10 billion plus. Right. Because if you had all the, the top 30 banks in the US today, like flip their cash deposits into stablecoins, which they can't do for a variety of reasons. Like those, I would all say like, that's great, but it doesn't like compete with Circle, it doesn't compete with Tether, and it like doesn't compete with us.
That makes sense. And even if we have these 12, like how do you feel about interoperability? Like, do you think that will exist on the issuer level? Or will there really be this emergence of like stablecoin clearing houses? How do you see that's playing out?
I think a lot of market makers do this like stablecoin clearinghouse business today. And I think a lot of them are going to come to the market in a more tech-driven approach, right? Where I think it'll be a very similar business to like Citadel or Virtu today, where like they're picking up pennies on a bunch of flow, right? Because I think for them, they'll say, hey, yeah, Tether, Circle, AUSD, like you can come to us and it's all $1, right? And so they may not make money off the direct client, but what they can go do is like, oh, Tether's trading at a 1002 in Turkey. Now I've received that Tether for $1. I'll go sell it, make a penny in Turkey, right? Or, oh, USDC is trading at 9998 in Brazil. I'll go buy that and then sell it for, at par to this customer that came to me, right? So I think you'll have a bunch of these businesses. I think they're all primarily market makers at the end of the day.
And they will monetize for opportunities.
And I think they're going to be able to make a ton of money. They'll be able to, it'll be, a few $billion to start. But like if we believe that stablecoins are going to take over the world in 20 years, like, yeah, I could see Citadel making $1 billion on like this year. And I could see like a bunch of trading firms, making, because the flow is going to be so high that even if they're making less than a penny on each transaction, it doesn't matter.
But do you feel this will be like, do you feel this is something that a startup will win, or will TradFi just gobble that up because it's too similar? I mean, like, I feel like even Circle Payments Network is like designed to serve a similar function, right? Like, I feel issuers try to own that layer of the stack as well to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's tough to say. I don't think it's going to be a winner-take-all market for sure, right? Because you're going to have pockets of expertise, right? Like the person that is best for this in Southeast Asia is probably not going to be the best for this in the United States. But like, if I had to like, put my finger up in the air, I would say like 60% to 70% is going to be owned by like traditional firms. And then maybe 30 to 40 is owned by like newer tech firms, right? Whether that's like, stablecoin orchestration or something else, like an acceptance network like Ubix is up in the air.
So I think like the last kind of like major discussion point in the probably not the last, but in the kind of like lay of the land of stablecoins today, like high yielding stablecoins, right? Athena, USDe has been very popular. What's your take? How do these integrate with the broader proposition?
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for the Athena team. I think these products are like in the early days too, and they're going to be $1 trillion worth of these products. I think it's a misnomer to call them stablecoins because they're not, right? Like now there's like, there's sort of like this gray area for a long time of like, oh, what is like a stablecoin? Like now with Genius and Mika, like it's very clear like what a stablecoin is, right? I think people have started to use the word yield-bearing stablecoin because there's no other better word, but I do think they're entirely different products, right? Like, a treasury bond is nowhere near the same risk or rating as, a delta neutral hedge fund. Like, and that's the difference. Like, they're extremely different underlying products. I think the function of having it dollarized was extremely intelligent, but they're not stable coins. I don't know if I have like a better name. I've started to call these like things yield coins, but I do, having lived through Luna and, a bunch of these cycles where people either unintentionally or intentionally misrepresented what something was, and like that leading to bad outcomes. Like, I hate to kind of be that person that like is like, we need to call it something else that's wrong, but like I think we do because it's like entirely different. And frankly, like I'm also like irritated that like RWA is taken over because like it also implies that like digital assets aren't like real because we call like this whole category real world assets. It's like we're in the fake world, and also because like RWA has like a totally different term and means something entirely different in traditional finance. But I guess maybe going back to like these synthetic dollars or yield coins, whatever you want to call them, I think it's going to be an enormous market. I think USDe is at 12 billion. I don't know what the aggregate would be of all like these sort of like yield coins. Maybe it's like, let's call it 15 billion, although that's like probably high because I feel like Athena is like 95% market share. I think these get to $1 trillion in the next 10 years. I think the basis trade version will get a little bit stale at some point, but like whether it's, credit, done via on-chain credit or, off-chain credit, that's just put, the receivables put on chain. Like this is like the yield coin moment is like just beginning. I think Athena kind of kicked it off with a bang, after, obviously like Terra imploded last cycle, but like kicked it off with a bang for real this time. And so I'm excited to continue seeing what they do and what they put out in the market because I think there's a huge litany of products that can get created.
Let's briefly talk about Agora AUSD. You've just raised 50 million. What are you spending it on?
Yeah, so for us, it's product. We had a very clear vision from like the day one of the company, which is I sort of view like the stack in 4 layers, right? You sort of have like the settlement layer, the asset issuance, orchestration, with whether that's be with wallets or cards or other stables, and then you have sort of the application interface. Our goal has always been to bring like the world and traditional businesses on chain through stablecoins and stablecoin infrastructure. And so, we started at the stablecoin layer because we felt that that's the most strategic layer. And there's also like the time that needs to be built now. And you'll start to see us move sort of up the stack and to start to own more of that. And, some of these products we'll build in-house, but many of them will use best-in-class third-party providers, right? Whether it's on the wallet side or card side or something else, but you'll start to see us look and feel, like I would say in some ways like a neobank and infrastructure platform. And that's what we're going to be going over the next, 12 months. So I'm still spending 90% of my time on a stable coin and growing adoption because that'll always be the main focus of the business. But you'll start to see a lot more of these products come to light. And then, eventually once that product's really ready and fleshed out, we can start turning on some of the nozzle for incentives. But, we've always wanted to sort of be a long-term oriented business that is diversified from just sort of stablecoin and float income, and build really like the stablecoin infrastructure platform that helps bring traditional businesses on chain.
Interesting. Stupid question, but like, do you feel there's a risk of you competing with your customers through that kind of like next level of productization?
It depends on what we do. I think we're being very careful and considerate of it, right? Because I think, you can say, oh, we'll be, a neobank, right? But it's like, what is like actually what you do, right? It's like kind of like how we were talking about, like, JPM is, has JPM coin. We're working with JP Morgan on a variety of, things and we'd love to continue doing so. Right. So even though they're like maybe the same product in name, they don't really compete necessarily for the same customer base as some of these others. And, most of them today are using USDCs. If we can control that end customer, it enables us to really drive down a lot of the economics across the stack, right? Because now no longer are you going to someone for orchestration, you're going to someone for the stablecoin, you're going to someone for the wallets, you're going to someone for the cards. We can sort of, build some of this ourselves, work with other third-party providers, made it, on the card side, like, Rainer Kalipa come to mind, right? On the wallet side, Turnkey, Privy, Fireblocks, right? Those are the folks that come to mind. And you can really drive down cost as a whole for the businesses. And also, I would say, build like a really excellent user experience, which is what's missing, I think, today from bringing a lot of traditional businesses on chain that want to move 10 million bucks cross-border instantly for no cost, right? But they don't, stitching together 4 different pieces of software that is all like totally brand new is a daunting task, right? And so I think if we can sort of unify this into a beautiful experience, it's going to be a game changer.
You say like you're competing, like you're moving into like the competition with the Bridges of the world and these kind of offerings?
No, because that's like a perfect example of someone that we would like utilize versus build, right? Is like what we might do. I don't want to give too much away, but like, right, I definitely don't view us moving into orchestration like from like an internal capability perspective. I view, and it's kind of, maybe as a hint, right? It's like, I think different people will be successful in different parts of the globe, right? And so unifying those pieces into your platform, I think is going to be important. It's not like going to be our core business, but you can hook in via API. And I think plenty of people are thinking about things in a similar way.
Awesome. Well, stay tuned. Much to look forward to. Let's wrap it up with a short run of quickfire questions.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Favorite chain for payments?
Oh, you can't do this to me. I love all our chains equally. I think similar, and I know this is not rapid fire, but I think sort of similar to, stablecoins, like all of them are going to have their different strengths, right? Whether it's based on the stablecoin itself or the payment corridor.
But if you had to pick one?
I'll go with Ethereum just because it has the most TVL today.
Okay, my man. What's your favorite non-crypto fintech product?
I'd have to say Venmo, only because it's the only crypto payment product that like actually changed my behavior from like a consumer perspective, like ever. And they, Venmo came out, like they built such a slick P2P experience for users in the US. Like, and I think a lot of crypto founders are trying to do the same with stablecoins. So that's a good one.
What's the biggest misconception about stablecoins?
That they all compete with one another.
Mm.
Like, right, it's like we don't compete with Athena, we don't compete with JPM coin, right? They all have their own, I would say, different, and Athena is not a stable coin, but like they all have their own different niches. And I think people, kind of view it, I get asked all the time, oh, do you compete with this person? I'm like, I don't. Like, they don't have a bank account. Like, right? Like, very different customer base. Like, payment companies aren't touching that asset, right? So I think that's the biggest misconception is like, oh, they're all competitive when they're really not. And they're all very, in many ways are very different.
Well, maybe we could deliver some educational content through this episode today. And to wrap it up, what's the book that shaped your thinking most?
Probably 2 different books. One book that I really like is Grit, which just like talks, it's delves into like the research of like what makes people successful. And I think it's just like true. Like I've seen it throughout my career, like personally. I think it's something that we hire for a lot as well.
The thesis is you got to have grit.
Yeah, it's basically right. It's like if you look at a bunch of character traits, right? And like, it's like, well, who's successful, whether it's like a Navy SEAL or someone, athletically, it's like who has grit, right? Who has perseverance. So that's one. And then like, I would say like the Market Wizards book series is like really good from Jack Schwager that just talks about, he interviews a bunch of financiers like, and former hedge fund PMs. And it's just a really good exercise in like seeing how different people think about different opportunities and weigh risk, return, and like concentration and that stuff. So I'd really recommend like that whole book series as well.
Interesting. On the grit one, last week I had Henry Stern from Privy on the episode.
I love Henry.
Yeah, a great guy, fun episode. And he said, okay, look, there's this book called Grit, but he's a fan of a different book called Quit.
Oh, interesting.
where kind of the main thesis is, okay, what separates an amateur poker player from a world champion is how often they fold. And the world champion folds like 85% of time, and that's an art in itself. So I
Right,
thought
you need to know when to know when to quit. I'm assuming that's what it is.
Yeah, you can't be gritty to no end, right? I think that
you take anything to an extreme, it's bad, right?
I mean, I think honestly, I think the educated opinion is probably you got to be gritty on the macro and like just push through, but you got to be like intellectually honest and rigorous on the micro and like be flexible, right?
I think that's exactly right. Right. It's like, I said early on this pod, we had a vision for what we wanted to do for 10 years very early on. We've made definitely many small pivots and tweaks like as we go along, and you have to be super flexible, right? You want to be directionally right. You're almost never going to be precisely right.
Hey, Nick, thanks so much for coming on the show. Lots of fun. Appreciate you joining us. And to all the listeners, see you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.